So, welcome back to part 2 of the RSP Christmas special. I'm still here with my Clonolly. Yeah.
He tried to replace us, but we fought back.
The alien tried to assimilate
He needed someone
them,
to make tea.
assimilate them with love. Yes. We determined that as the most English, Michael has to make the tea.
And northern.
And the most northern. Where's our, is this proper Yorkshire tea? I think not.
No, it's PG tips.
Yeah, there you go, proper fail.
Other teas are available.
Yeah, well, you know what? I'm not the northerner or the tea guy, so he should have brought the tea.
I brought everything else.
No, I love the fact that he's saying you're the northerner. He's Canadian. And Scottish.
But that's not northern.
That's not...
It's
that's
North Polish.
Well, yeah, northern is not actually about being the most north.
Yeah, no.
That's what I love about it. It's like you're northern, even if someone from further north than that says it to you.
Yeah.
So what we've got here is Oh My Goods, which is sort of it's a card game, but it's got some complexity to it, which is great because, you know, it uses these kind of mechanics, which you'll see sort of again in Port Royal, which we'll play later. You see it in other games like San Juan, which are sort of, they're all card games that are, or games you... So it's funny because we describe them as card games because all the components are cards, but they're actually more like games that use cards. I mean, There's a lot of the mechanics in this game that you could substitute in little wooden tokens and things like that with, but the reason you don't is because in order to keep the production costs down, keep the price of the game down, you just use cards. And that leads to sort of some interesting mechanical decisions because, like many of these kinds of games, the cards represent buildings you can build, but they also represent goods that you produce and currency as well. So, you know, they sort of form these multiple functions, which mean that you have all these interesting choices. What do I do with this card? Am I going to use it as a good, or am I going to use it as a building, you know? And if I do the latter, I can't do the former. And what's more important to me now?
It also raises the annoying question sometimes when it's a good on your property, that might be the card you really, really, really want, and you can't use it as a building because it's a resource.
Well, that's true, although in this game there's less of that. So what happens is, anyway, what we'll do is we'll quickly run down how the game works for you. See, it's 2 to 4 players, which is why we have 4 starting buildings and 4 starting workers. The buildings here are all the same. They're called Char Burners, and in the game there are 5 basic resources. And the 5 basic resources are stone, which looks like this, here, and wood. You'll see that all of these have wood on because that's the most common basic resource. And then they also have each got one of the more sort of specialist basic resources, in this case stone. This one here is wood and wheat, you can see there. This one here is clay and wood. And finally, this one here is...
I maintain it's wool. It's wool.
Ollie says it's wool. I said it was sheep silk, and Michael says vermicelli. But
it's only rice noodles.
The famous cheese.
That's what vermicelli is.
I know. Okay, but I use the northern term.
The northern term.
Oh dear.
Okay, good.
I know.
And all of the... Well, you do... I don't know. You're an enigma wrapped in a complexity hidden under a mystery.
Wrapped in an accent.
It's the way I like it.
So, you're a northern mystery, just like the Red Riding trilogy.
Yes. Me and Sean Bean.
Sean, if you're out there and you're watching, please come on my show.
Yeah, I will give up my spot for you, Sean. It's fine.
Yeah, look,
we could be both on it with you.
Yeah, I love the fact
too much northern.
That would be
so much
that
northern.
Would be amazing.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Then we could. Say
I would actually sit that one out. Just the Northerners special.
Yeah.
So everyone starts with a Char Burner, and what the Char Burner does is it takes the one sort of advanced basic resource in the wood, and then you can burn it to produce coal. Now that's very important. So coal is like, it's not a basic resource, it's like a sort of a produced good, it's called in the game. And the produced goods you can tell because they're wrapped up inside these white cogs, whereas all the other goods, the basic goods, are in colored squares.
They also have monetary value.
Yep, and so the produced goods all have a monetary value, which we will get to.
So the coal is 1 in this example.
Yeah, in this example, the coal is worth one gold piece, or $1, or good buck.
1 unit of currency.
Yeah, exactly. 1 monies.
Good
So-
definition there.
We've got these 4 worker cards. We'll each have one. They're all the exact same. They're double-sided, so the lady's on one side and the dude is on the other side. And then each card has the person in sort of a different appearance. So you've got your happy person and your grumpy person or sloppy person, and here's the sloppy dude and the happy dude. And in the middle, you've got this strange cryptic iconography here, and that's actually just a sort of a cheat for your turn order. So on the first turn, you draw some cards, and on the second turn, you reveal a marketplace and assign a worker. On the third turn or phase of the round, you reveal more of the marketplace, and in the final phase of the round, you produce goods and build buildings.
Or by assistance.
Or by assistance, yeah. And we'll sort of explain how that works in just a moment. But the reason you're going to be using... so the reason you've got a sort of a grumpy side and a happy side is because you've got goods that you'll produce every turn. And you're also going to have a marketplace that's going to contain goods. So every turn you'll have your hand of cards, and you start with 5. You draw 2 at the beginning of every turn. And that's about it. So hand management is a really key decision, because you can spend your cards to get goods, but if you do that, then obviously you won't have them for your buildings if you need them, and also you don't... It's sort of like a fail-safe if things don't work out in your favor, because the second part of the turn is revealing the marketplace, which actually involves revealing cards from the top of this deck, like this, to the center of the table. And what we're looking for are these half-sun symbols just under the resource here. So for the purpose of this, we're actually ignoring the entire card and just looking at the resources. And what we're looking for is 2 sun symbols. And once we've revealed 2 sun symbols, that part of the market phase is ended. And now we must decide what we're going to do with those resources, because that's a communal pool. Everyone has access to it at all times. So they're never like sort of spent or taken away. They're just available to everyone. And then we'll each have one of these starting buildings, and we've got to assign our person to that building. Once you, as the game goes on, you'll build more buildings and you'll have more options here. But you'll only ever have, well, you'll have the one worker and maybe an assistant who looks like this person here. So these are the assistants, and what they sort of allow for is for more than one building to produce goods a turn. But unless you have a person working in it, it won't produce any goods. So this is a key decision. And what's going to happen is you're going to actually produce goods based on these 2 resource costs here that we talked about earlier. And those resources must be available to you in the marketplace. If they're not, you can make the number up by discarding cards with the matching symbols from your hand. But like I said earlier, then you're discarding these cards. Those represent the buildings you're going to build as well. So you really don't want to be doing that, because you're only going to get 2 a turn, maybe more, but that's hard to come by. So you don't really want to be discarding your cards too much. So you want to really be making sure that you're making the most of that, these resources here in the middle of the table, because they're free. So you can either pick the happy worker,
Be diligent.
the diligent worker, we would say the worker who has a nice manager. And they have to spend the exact resources here on the card, and if they match the exact resources with goods from here or goods you discard from your hand, they produce 2 goods. And you take 2 goods and put them down on your card here. But that will actually happen later. So these will represent the goods you produced. But that happens later, because once you've assigned... So you can also assign the sloppy worker, or the half-assed worker, the worker who hates her manager, because her manager is a shithead. So this worker only produces 1 good, but the advantage is that they've got this -1 wild here on the top of the card there. So you can see this one produces 2 goods, this one produces 1, but has this caveat. And what that means is you can pick 1 resource here of the 3 in the cost and just get rid of it. So she could pay 2 stone or 1 wood and 1 stone, basically, to pay for this. And that just sort of hedges your bets, you know. Like I can see here, I've got 1 wood. So maybe I pick the sloppy worker in the hope that 1 stone will come up later in the marketplace. Because the third phase of this is revealing the second half of the marketplace. But before that happens, if there's a building in your hand that you want to play, you also have to put that down. So right now you have to commit to building a building. And you pick the one you want in your hand, and you actually put it face down on the table like that, so people can't see what it is. So you'll reveal that later when you build it. And once you've committed your worker in her diligent or sloppy form to a building, and picked your building that you're going to build, if you're going to build one, then you're done. And everyone will do this simultaneously, and once everybody's done, then we'll all go, great, we're done. Then we'll reveal the second part of the market phase. And this is essentially exactly what happened before again.
But this one's in turn order.
We just revealed the cards.
So after the cards are revealed, it's in turn order. So you'll produce your build.
Right, yeah, no, but the fourth phase, but this is the third phase.
Yes.
The third phase is just, again, so once we've all done that second phase simultaneously choosing this stuff, then the third phase is just revealing more of these cards, and that's it. So there's the stone. So actually, I could have gotten away with having my diligent worker down, but I didn't know, and I wasn't sure whether or not I wanted to take that gamble. And that's one of the key decisions to Oh My Goods, and that's one of the things that makes it interesting, because you need those goods. That's how you get money.
Yeah. So if you had done the diligent worker, and in the marketplace you couldn't make up 2 stone and 1 wood from what was down here or in your hand, then you get nothing.
I'd get nothing at all, which is pretty severe because you need it for money. So here we go. There's another card. It's wood again. There is another sun there, so that's it. So we've got 7 cards in the marketplace. The marketplace will only ever be a minimum of 4 or a maximum of many. The most we've ever seen is about 8, but it could be higher. It's unlikely, but it could be. But it will always be at least 4 because you'll have 4 cards with suns on. And then we enter the final phase, which takes place in turn order. So there will be an active player who went first. The active player rotates as the rounds go on. But if it was me, what would happen is I would check to see if I can make up the resource cost. I can. I'm just going to grab a quick hand of cards here. I would have some cards in my hand.
Yeah.
It's 5, actually. You start with 5, and then at the beginning of every turn you draw 2 more, so in the first turn you'll have 7 cards.
Which is why it's got a little +2.
Yeah,
Just there.
in the first phase of the cheat card, exactly. Thanks, Ollie. So what'll happen now is I can automatically activate my character here because I've gone for the budget thing, and there's a stone and wood there, so that's going to happen. If I needed a second stone or whatever, I could discard a card from my hand, but I don't need to, so I won't. I take 1 good, and I put it here. And that represents 1 coal now. That is a coal. It's worth $1, which is great. And then you've got this funny wood here, and that's called a production chain. So if I activated this building and produced a good, which I have done, then I can activate a chain. And if I have any resources in my hand or on the table in my other buildings, produced goods. This is a produced good. I said before that's coal there in the cog, that's produced good. These represent how many of those produced goods you've got. So I've got 1 coal, it's here. I can spend any produced goods I have in any of my buildings, as well as resources from my hand that match this symbol. So that will only be basic resources in my hand. If there's any sort of advanced resources or produced goods down there that I need, they'll have to be coming from my buildings. I can then discard them. So for example, this is a wood card in my hand here. It's got the wood symbol that matches the production chain symbol there. So I can discard that, that goes back there, and I can take 1 more. I can do that as many times as I like. As long as I have wood in my hand, I can just keep going. Because, well, that's how you produce lots of goods.
The key thing here is that the buildings will have different chain production costs. And the idea is if you can get a good combination of buildings where your building you're producing this turn creates the resource that you want to use on your other buildings, because the coal is worth $1, for example. You'll have a tailor who will make shirts that are worth $4. You'll have bricks that are worth $2, and the whole idea is you're converting the lower things into the higher value goods.
Why don't we give people an example here? So this is there's a sawmill here, and the sawmill I could build that later. Like what I put down here, what was that? Oh, that was a marketplace. We'll ignore that. Let's say I built a sawmill. So what would happen? I've got my building down here. I now after I've produced goods, I have an opportunity to make this building that I've put down earlier in the turn. So this happens to be a sawmill which costs 3. I've got coal here, it's worth 1. I've got 3 here. So I pay all 3 of my coal, that's discarded, and the sawmill is complete because of the cost here in the corner. And then that's my whole turn. I build a building, I produce goods, and then I can build that building I put down earlier. If I didn't have a building, I can buy one of these assistants instead. But I'll talk a bit more about assistants in just a second. Now that I've built my sawmill, play passes to the next player, which is Michael in this case, and then Ollie, and then that's the round complete. And you'll notice on the sawmill, it's basically the same setup. You've got the basic resource cost here to produce the produced good, which is planks, You can do a production chain with wood from your hand, or you would never have wood as a produced good under your building because it's a raw resource or it's a basic resource. So, but what you will get later on is maybe something like the cooperage. And if you've built this as well, you can see the cooperage's production cost is in fact logs to make barrels, which are worth 5. So if I've got logs in the sawmill that I've produced, and I activate the cooperage with my worker in the production phase, I'll get maybe a couple of cards, or 1 card because she's on the sloppy side over there. But then I can chain it by discarding these. And for every one I discard, I get one on the cooperage. And the reason this is good is because planks are worth 2, and barrels are worth 5.
And every 5 coins is a victory point.
Yep, at the end of the game, every 5 coins is worth victory points. I would just add that there is somewhere here slightly more complicated.
How many can you add from here to there?
As many as I want. As many as I've got. Like I said, it's completely unlimited for the production chain.
You keep turning over grey buildings.
I keep turning over the... I'm looking for one good example of a building here, and I can't find it. Right here, this is what I'm looking for. So, some of the buildings have a production chain cost of 2. And this could be 2 produced goods, or a basic good and produced good. And in that case, if you would spend 2 cards to get the good there, you get 2 of them. So you're never really losing out. So for example, if I had fabric and coal here as produced goods, I could take those 2 cards and put them both into the tailor's shop. Obviously, that's great because coal is worth 1 and shirts are worth 4.
So you could have 8 essentially.
Yeah.
So I'd be making a big profit.
Yeah.
And the buildings, they also have these numbers up in the top right. That's victory points. At the end of the game, you'll get victory points for the buildings you've got. You'll get victory points for assistance, and you'll get victory points for 1 per 5 coin. There's also a special rule that comes into effect on the end in the last round of the game. So the game ends when someone's got 8 buildings. The minute someone builds their 8th building, that signifies that round is the penultimate round. You'll then have 1 more complete turn, and then the game will end, and the person with the most points wins. Shocker.
Yes.
I know, right? You're all gasping. The most points.
What?
Innovative. And,
If it ain't broke.
yeah, right. So, and the special rule is that, so during the course of the game, you can only do a production chain in a building you activated to produce that turn, right? So if I want to turn logs into barrels, I need to put my worker into the cooperage here. But if, on the final turn of the game, I can activate the production chain element of all of my buildings, which means if I've sort of created a clever chain of buildings that just upgrade goods from one another, I can just kind of funnel everything into the most expensive building. So it sort of rewards having expensive buildings. But, you know, you need time to make those buildings, and if you've got another player who's just rapidly putting out all these cheap buildings trying to end the game, you know, then you have to account for that. So there's sort of different strategies there as well.
It's also worth noting the assistants here. You get these instead of building a building. So in the building phase where you would build a building, instead you can be like, I'm not going to hire an assistant.
Well, now you must make that choice in phase 2 when you're assigning your worker and choosing a building to put down. You just don't put a building down.
Yeah.
But you don't tell your opponent, oh, I'm going to buy an assistant. You just tell them, I'm not producing a building this round.
Yeah.
And then
you don't have to produce a building.
Yeah, exactly. You don't have to produce a building. Maybe you can't afford anything in your hand. Maybe you just don't want to. I mean, you can put down a building, and then later you can't afford it, in which case you discard it.
Nope, you take it back.
You take it back to your hand,
So
that's right.
if you've put a building down thinking I'm going to have enough resources to pay for it, and it turns out you don't, you can just take it back as long as you don't reveal it.
That's right, that's correct. But if you haven't put a building down, but in that case you couldn't buy an assistant, could you?
No, because
as long as you've not built it, because when it's face down, it's not a building yet. It's a plan.
But haven't you committed to do the building?
But I feel like if you couldn't afford the building, you probably wouldn't be able to afford an assistant.
Well, the thing is here is the assistants are slightly different, and
They're
this
quite
is
cheap
because,
though as well.
They're cheap, but they have this additional cost on them.
You can only buy this one if you have those cards of those matching colours, which if Mike can pass me a dark grey one.
Oh, yeah.
A dark grey one. So, in order to buy this assistant, I need to have 3 of these colour buildings. And if you notice...
Which is actually a really steep cost, because those grey buildings don't actually produce goods. They're a bit unique in the sense that they give you special powers. I mentioned earlier that you draw 2 cards around, but the grey building, for example, this one lets you draw an extra card at the beginning of the round if you have 3 cards or fewer in hand.
Yeah, and there's another one as well that produces it. Basically, provides you with a guaranteed resource, which can be quite handy. But you've got a limited amount of buildings you can build. The idea here being that we have a certain number of these, and once they're gone, they're gone. Once you've hired one, they stay with you, and they allow you to activate more than one production building.
So when you're assigning your worker in the second phase of the game to produce goods, if you've got more than one building, although this is a terrible example because that doesn't produce goods. You can't. So if you've got these 2 buildings, you can assign your worker on her happy side or sad side, sloppy side or diligent side. You can assign your other one to a building. Note that you would actually, when you buy the assistant, you assign it to one building you've already got. And you don't choose every turn where to put it. It actually remains in that building until you pay to move it, and you pay the cost again to move it.
Yeah.
So you would pay 2 coins if you wanted to move her to another building. Otherwise, she would stay there. So if she was attached to this building, you couldn't then put this person in that building as well. Because you can only have one worker in a building at any given time. So I would have to pay 2 to move her if I wanted to put my person in there. The thing is, she actually, the worker is not as good as your main person here, your primary worker.
They're a little bit less flexible because they are only diligent.
Yeah, they don't have a sloppy side, they're only diligent. Furthermore, they only produce 1 good, so they're not as efficient as the other worker.
But if they... I have a question. If their assistant is, say, in this example, in the tailor shop, does that mean every go you have to give 2
You don't have to because you can fail to produce, but it means you have the option of always producing that.
if you do have
So,
it
like,
available.
if for example, if the resources for the tailor shop were available in the marketplace, you might as well just produce the good. There's no reason not to. However, if the resources were unavailable in the marketplace and you had to discard cards from your hand to make up that total, you might choose not to do it because you wanted to keep your cards in hand. But it just means that you have that option of getting.
available.
The other power of this is that if you do that, then you can activate the production chain, because the production chain can only be activated in buildings that produce this round. So, you could actually have 2 production chains going on in a single turn, which could be very potent for making a lot of money.
The key is that depending on the size of your player base, you have a different number of these to start with. So for two players, you have 4 assistants, and they're randomly picked, and it's randomly which side up they are. They're all different. They're all quite...
They have a grumpy side and a happy side too, but it doesn't actually mean anything.
Well, as far as we can tell, it doesn't mean anything. But
I mean, it means they're
once
grumpy or
gone-
happy, but there's no diligent or sloppy.
Yeah. Well,
It's either a
once
Monday or a
they're gone,
Friday.
they're gone. It's always a Wednesday.
There's always a Wednesday.
But,
Hump day.
Can I have that assistant? Thank you. Because one of the things that's important is obviously these charcoal bases all have different char burners. They all have different resource costs, so we randomly get them.
Well, they're not different. They're associated with a different basic resource. Now, as we said earlier, all the basic resources actually have the same probability in the deck, with the exception of wood. Wood is the most common. That's why they all have wood. That's why wood is the chain cost. Whereas everything else, there's an equal number of cards in the deck. So, it kind of, because this deck goes through it, you get through this deck really, really quickly. Then you just shuffle it, make a new one. I guess the other rule that's worth mentioning is that there's no actual hand size.
Yeah.
So you can't just keep building up cards in hand. If you want to just sort of sit out a few rounds and not do anything too effective, but build up a lot of cards in hand to sort of get what you're really looking for, that's an option.
You can also mulligan.
That's the other thing I was actually going to mention is the mulligan.
Yeah, the first phase before you've drawn your 2 cards. Every player does this at the same time. You can discard your entire...
Well, no, I
hand.
think you do, if there's more than one player that wants to do it, you go in order from the active player.
The idea is if you're just looking going, I don't like this, you can just do it. So you discard your entire hand and you can draw an equal number of cards new. So if you've just got things that are too expensive or not useful for you, you can get rid of them.
Yep, so you can mulligan at the top of the round if you don't like the stuff you've got in hand.
Yeah.
And then you keep your second draw, but you can do it again next round if you still don't have cards you don't like. And again, it's sort of, so you can sort of make a big effort to look for one card specifically, or as Ollie said, the cost of buildings range from like 2 to 25 or 21 or something. So if you've got some like really expensive buildings that you just can't play, then you can get rid of those.
Yeah, and the good thing is this game's actually got a built-in mechanic to refresh the deck. It actually says, with most games they do this, the discard pile will become the main deck if the main deck runs out. But it also has a caveat of, if the discard pile and the main deck are both empty,
which is extremely unlikely.
extremely unlikely, but they've thought of this.
Yeah.
You have to. Every player discards half their hand.
It's bad. It's bad. Every player discards half their hand, rounded down, and that becomes a new discard pile, which is then shuffled together to make a new.
Yeah, which
deck.
is quite clever because it means that they've thought in
Well-
any way could the game run out.
Yeah, and
This is
it's
what
also
can-
sort of like it's sort of saying to players like, don't just spend the entire game stockpiling everything.
Yeah, because it will just
Because eventually you may have to discard everything.
yeah, and it's also the fact of technically there's no round limit, so it puts a measure of pace onto it.
Okay,
Right.
here we are. We're good to go. We're good to start.